Good morning and welcome to Friday. A lot of us are welcoming Friday. Especially those of us that work Monday through Friday, we're looking for that Friday to signal the last work day and move us into the weekend. For those of us like me that work 24/7, 365, well, it's just another day. I had to have a little fun with you. Getting kind of a little spooky light on my face there. I think I'll turn that off. Now today here on Friday, we're heading into continuing with the idea of the return, Hosea's story. I'm not going to have as much introductory material today. You may be relieved or feel disappointed. You can hang in here with us, and there'll be some days where I have a couple minutes of introductory material, and some other days when we get right to the subject matter. We're continuing to watch Hosea play the role of a lifetime and share the heart of God with his people, Israel and the southern kingdom, Judah. He has a word for them, and it is a very detailed complaint. And it's prophetic. It speaks of the future. It's not only forthtelling, speaking the heart of God for the people, but it's revelatory, revealing the heart of the people, and then it's prophetic. It's speaking of a future activity when God is going to be working in a hopeful and faithful way. And so there is always a silver lining in the middle of this. And so let's look today not only at the realities of what happens when we turn away from the Lord or fail to come to him, but let's look at the silver lining of what happens when we actually reconnect with him and to see what he is actually doing, what his real motivation is. I just mentioned yesterday that God's purposes are always redemptive. If he was looking for a reason and a way of damning us, he already had it, and he would have smoked us a long time ago, and we wouldn't even be really aware. But what we need to do is consider. I'm just asking you to consider the redemptive purposes of God working in the middle of our stubbornness and our self-will, and holding up an opportunity to us, if we would just recognize it and respond to it, of mercy that we always access through humility and repentance. This is the idea of returning to the living God. And so let's get into Realityville then. I did manage to do a little bit of introductory material. I just can't help myself. And we're going to look then at Hosea chapter 8, verses 7 through 10. And it reads like this: They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. Now there's an ongoing joke that goes between my wife and I. She said, "What are you hungry for? What can I fix you?" I said, air sauce and wind pudding. The other part of that is for me to come home from somewhere and say, "Well, what did you fix for dinner?" And she'll say, air sauce and wind pudding. It's another way of saying nothing. We need something a little more substantial than what we breathe, air, in order to eat for sustenance. So they sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. So not only do they get nothing in return, but you can't just get nothing. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so something comes rushing in. And so when you head the wrong direction, you don't simply get not God. You get something else. This is another testimony to the reality of the dark side of the supernatural reality, that there are unclean spirits, fallen angels, there are nefarious forces working against us and at cross purposes with God in rebellion. And so here's what Israel has been discovering. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. Now, a wind is nice. It can cool you and be a gentle breeze, wonderful. But a whirlwind, we understand, would be tornadic. It would be like a tornado in the southwest, and we have seen all kinds of destruction wrought by a tornado. They sow the wind and reap the whirlwind. The stalk has no head. So they raise something agriculturally, but it doesn't have any fruit. So therefore, it will produce no flour. And were it to yield grain, were they to have success in their foolish adventure away from God, then foreigners would simply swallow it up. Why? Because they have sold themselves out into relationship as a nation with the foreign nations around them that take advantage of them. They find themselves constantly rendered destitute. Israel is swallowed up. Now she is among the nations like something no one wants. What was the position she occupied before? She was among the nations, and what was God's purpose and what was God's intention? That she would be a shining city on a hill, that He would raise them up as His people, different from every other people on the earth. They would be dedicated to Him and devoted to Him, and they would reflect His glory. And then the people of the earth would see what God was doing in this people called Israel, and they also would come. So she was intended to be a very attractive, very beautiful woman, so to speak, that all the men would fix their attention upon. So just think of that imagery right there. But now, what's happened? She's swallowed up. She is among the nations like something no one wants. It's like dust on your feet. Nothing special. It's like wind blowing in the desert, or sand in your food if you're a Bedouin. For they have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey, wandering alone. Now, we don't quite get the picture of this wild donkey wandering alone, but there's another prophet that helps us to fill this image out a little bit more. Why would a wild donkey be wandering alone? Wild donkeys only go out solo when they're in heat. And so if it's a female donkey, she's going to be wandering alone because she's in heat and seeking a mate. If it's a male donkey, well, they're always looking for a female donkey that's looking for them. And so there's this picture of they have gone up, excuse me, something tickling the throat there. They have gone up to Assyria like a wild donkey, wandering alone. This is the picture of seeking a mate, seeking someone. So it's a very forlorn picture. It's a very desperate picture. And that is not the picture at all that God had in mind for His people. He wanted them to be His people, the sheep of His pasture, to never be wandering alone, but to be well taken care of, shepherded by good shepherds, and bountiful, and being taken care of by God Himself. So what happens when a person who is forsaking the Lord gets off on the sidetrack? This is the picture then, that they are desperately looking. They're looking for love in all the wrong places. They're looking for acceptance. They're looking for that specialness. And this was actually a picture as well of Hosea's wife, Gomer. She was out being wild, looking around for somebody who was going to give her some money, give her some goods in exchange for her love. And so this is the picture of Israel. Wow, has she fallen from where God had originally pictured her. He goes on to say, Ephraim has sold herself to lovers. Although they have sold themselves among the nations, now listen to this, although they have sold themselves among the nations, even though they have, for a price, substituted and moved away from God and sought the gods of other nations and the favors of other nations, listen to this word of hope. Remember I told you that when we look at these pictures, very desolate and negative pictures, if we're looking at it as God trying to destroy them, we're missing the picture. This is actually a picture where in the middle of it there is some form of hope. There is some stopgap measure. There's something that happens that checks it, that steps in. And listen to this word in the middle of that. Although they have sold themselves among the nations, I will now gather them together. It wouldn't be uncommon for them to be separated out apart and spread out. But he says, I have a plan. I'm going to gather them together. They will begin to waste away under the oppression of the mighty king. So he has a plan, and the plan is to put them under a mighty king, but at least do what? Keep them together. What would normally happen is that they would be scattered amongst the nations and swallowed up through death, through marriage, and their seed would be scattered, and they could no longer speak of being other than a mongrel nation. They wouldn't have their unique identity. But who's working even in the middle of this? He said, I will now gather them together, and they will be brought basically under the oppression of the mighty king. So God is working a plan to at least keep them together. Amazing. That should testify alone right there to the mercies of God. He has a plan. And so here's what we can come away with today. In my headstrong ways, as I seek my own way rather than the way of the Lord, and I come to sowing wind and weeping whirlwind when my best plans and hopes come crashing down, if I look very carefully, God still has something going on there. He is so committed to me that He is going to act in hope with an attempt to preserve my life and hold on to something that will allow a new future to happen. What a hopeful message in the midst of all this complaint that's lodged, rightly so, by God against His people, Israel. So with that, there surely something out of there has stirred your spirit, can stick with you for you to meditate upon it today. And with that, I'm going to say, the Lord bless you and keep you, cause His face to shine upon you, and give you peace as you pursue and seek after Him, as you turn and return to Him. The Lord bless you. See you tomorrow.